extension workshop from the College of Business and Management Sciences. And the title is An Interrogation of Tax Education Gaps in the Informal Sector and how they can be leveraged in broadening the tax base. Being a period of COVID, we're not going to do so many. So I believe most of the guests are here, though we are expecting others to come. Shortly, before we go far, each of us must be having a program, but our program began at 8 a.m. and it will end at midday, God willing. And in the first session, though our program arrivals are still continuing because a.m. And it will end at midday. Opening prayer, and so this will be in the first session, voluntary, so we shall get a volunteer to pray for our session. Self-introduction, we must know each other. Opening prayer, opening remarks from the principal of CoBAMS. We shall have remarks from Reef. Most likely, he will be on Zoom. Then we shall have break from the principal. Then presentation of findings. We shall have the AI from Reef will present us the research findings. And then later on, we shall have comments from the audience about the research. And then we shall have remarks from the Assistant Commissioner of Research and Planning, URA, Research Office. Then we expect closing remarks from Macquarie University Management, have comments from the audience. We shall have about the research. And then lunch. So make sure that you don't leave empty stomach. We shall have some lunch, and then we depart at our own leisure. So once again, I thank you for making it here today, and very soon we're going to begin our program. And be calm, be comfortable, and the weather is good. So the weather is good. So we have all reasons to be comfortable and calm. Thank you very much. And very soon we're going to begin our program. And be calm, be comfortable, and the weather is good. Any volunteer to give us an opening prayer? Okay, Ajay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Let's humble ourselves for a word of prayer. In the name of God, most merciful, most beneficial, we thank you, God, for the gift of life. We thank you for Makerere. We thank you for this grant given to us by you. We pray that as we disseminate, you give us a fruitful dissemination and we benefit from it, and the intentions of the PI and the entire team are met. In the name of God, most merciful, most beneficial. Amen.
Thank you very much for that wonderful prayer. Should we have self-introductions right now, or wait for the principal to arrive? Because just on the way down coming. The purpose of having two guests physically present is for social distancing purposes. So, realize that we are few, we are not so many, so we can practice social distancing. maybe our guests to brief you shortly about the project. The government of Uganda, through Makerere University's Research and Innovations Fund, uh, sponsored many research projects in Makerere University, and one of the conditions was that for you to do effective research, uh, academia has to partner with the practitioners. Our principal, being the PI on this project, one of the conditions wisely decided that we must partner with URA because URA is the tax administrator and the enforcer of the tax law. And we partnered with URA to conduct this study. And therefore, the results are also beneficial to URA to strengthen their abilities in enforcing or knowing where the gaps are in the informal sector and try to get solutions. And in this dissemination workshop, we invited different categories of people and organizations. And as we shall see in self-introductions, we have people from the regulators, we have people from the business community, we have academia, we have activists, because CISBAG was invited. So we have activists, and we have the future generation, the students community. So we shall see later during the self-introduction. So we have activists, and we have the future generation, the students community. So we shall see later during the self-introduction. principal, in your absence, members made a resolution that we are not going to introduce ourselves before you arrive, because you also need to be in touch with everyone here. So the agenda for the item of self-introduction is next. But please quickly, we are not going to move on. We begin from the right of this board, in touch everyone here, the back line. The agenda for the item of self-introduction is next. Thank you. Next.
Basically, organization for the program funded by USAID. I'm Kayonde Evarist from the business community.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Zaina Nakabwe. I'm assistant lecturer here in the College of Business.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Benjamin Ikawot from Makerere University.
Thank you.
My name is Presumptive School of Economics.
Thank you. Thank you. We are going to co-MC, and at this moment, I would like to call upon my co-MC to take over. Thank you.
Good morning once again.
We are going to co-MC.
You're welcome to this dissemination. As you can see on the program, we've already had the opening prayer, the self-introduction. Once again, now we are supposed to have the opening remarks, and I would like to call upon Dr. Bal to come and give us the opening remarks. We've already had the opening prayer, the self-introduction. Now we are supposed to have the opening remarks. And I'd like to
good morning, colleagues. It is a great honor for me this morning to stand on behalf of my boss, the principal, who is actually the principal investigator of this project, to give opening remarks. First of all, I would like to thank the government of Uganda for noticing the importance of scientific investigation to the growth of the country. This has been one of the missing links, but I'm very glad that now the government of Uganda trusts the university as a source of knowledge that is having a great potential in driving the growth of the country. And at the same time, I would like to thank the Makerere University Management for doing the great work of mobilizing government, of encouraging government, of creating this confidence in government that Makerere University can be a great contribution to the growth of the nation through scientific contributions. This, I know that our bosses will receive the information in the university management with a great work for creating a conducive environment for research, thanks to very good internet these days. All that was done by university management to see that we receive as members of staff these research grants is very, very much appreciated. And there's no doubt for sure that a few years down the road, Makerere University will have very many staff at senior level, because it is such endeavors, other than contributing to policy direction in government, but also it is a very great avenue for academic growth. And for this, kindly participants give a round of applause to our government, but also the university management. Now I come to the team, the researchers. I want to most sincerely congratulate you for number one, very nice research proposal that's definitely completed. Now I won the grant. This is not a simple matter. I want to congratulate you sincerely, not only that, but also for having implemented the project that I planned. And that right now we are witnessing a dissemination of the research findings. I have a policy brief before me here. And when I read through, I see very, very great messages. But before I go there, I would like to make a note of the fact that the principal investigator of this project is at the same time the principal, the head of the College of Business and head of the College of Business and Management, which is very, very, this challenge, because being a principal, you are an accounting officer of the college. A number of activities run around you. You are very busy in meetings, in top management, in college issues, but reserving time to write a proposal and reserving time to implement a research project. Colleagues, this is very, very, we should learn from this. And kindly, actually, let us clap for Professor Hisali for, remaining very scientific in terms of research, but also being a very, very nice administrator, busy here and there. The motivation of this research project, basing on the fact that, in Uganda, we are still struggling with the very low tax to GDP ratio. Actually, after rebasing, it is less than 13%. And when you compare with the East African, other East African countries, we are still lagging behind. But also, in the Sub-Saharan Africa, with a target of 16%, we still lag behind. And so it is very clear that a study that is interrogating tax education gaps in the informal sector and how they can be leveraged in broadening the tax base is actually was long overdue, and having this project, having this dissemination is actually touching the heart of our nation. Part of what we have had as great problems is domestic revenue mobilization. But now, undertaking scientific work in this area is a great endeavor, and I want to thank the research team for the great work done. And when I read through some of the key gaps that you have identified in your studies, issues to do with the limited awareness of the teens, because you are touching the informal sector, lack of awareness on how to acquire a teen. These are key issues that are actually going to point to very, very important direction of building capacity of taxpayers, and you know, at the end of the day, we shall realize an improvement in the tax to GDP ratio. Lastly, I would like to thank the research team for making great partnerships, because you know, having URA as a key partner in this project is very, very important, and we know that now the key policy messages are going into the right department, and that government will definitely respond. And also all the others, colleagues that have come from different MPAs, but also from the private sector. It is great. Thank you, research team. And I've had a chance of reading the brief, but we are eager to see what you are going to present. And I would like to wish every one of us a very fruitful, you know, number one, listening to the principal investigator, but two, discussion and debate after the presentation. Thank you very much, colleagues.
Thank you, Dr. Bale. Dr. Bale, the Deputy Principal for the College of Business.
Thank you very much.
While he was giving his remarks, we had the pleasure to usher in Madame Sophie Nampewo, a senior researcher and economist from CISLA. You're welcome, Madame. We would also like to welcome Dr. Christine Mwebesa, a researcher as well. You're welcome, Doctor. We would also like to welcome Dr. Tera Mayanja. You're welcome, Doctor. According to the program, we're supposed to have the RIF representative, but we are called by time. And so the next would be presentation from the PI. I'm honored to invite the principal, Professor Hisali, to come and give us his presentation.
Thank you so much, the MC, and good morning to you all, colleagues, and you are most welcome. We will take some short time to do a presentation on the tax education gaps in the informal sector and how these gaps can be leveraged to broaden Uganda's tax base. Once again, you are most welcome. I see the numbers are quite good, and I'm sure there are quite a number of other colleagues attending via the different media platforms. So in terms of introduction now, remember we are looking at the tax education gaps mainly. But before we go into the gaps that we have identified, we will give some background, and that background is around the important role that tax education plays in enhancing voluntary compliance. Of course, not everyone, and indeed I think it is a fact of nature that not very many people would want to pay taxes voluntarily. But there are certain mechanisms that increase compliance, and one of them clearly is tax education and tax information. So how does tax education and information enhance voluntary compliance? There are many, many avenues, but we've listed just a few examples. One is it provides guidance on tax laws, on the taxpayer obligations, as well as those incentives that are available to those who pay taxes. And a good example in Uganda is that when you are not registered for VAT, you cannot do business with government. So these are some of the incentives. So it is important to pass on that message. But we also know that tax systems change over time. Sometimes they change rapidly, sometimes slowly, but nonetheless, they change. And those changes in the tax system have to be communicated in one or another to the public, and especially to the potential taxpayers and to those who are already paying taxes. But it's also important to pass on messages with regard to the basic procedures around taxation, including things like keeping of records, filing of returns, the teams, how you identify yourself, and all these. So tax education becomes important. And because of the importance then of tax education, in almost all, actually I can comfortably say that in all jurisdictions, tax education will be an important component of the tax administration. So that is our context, but we also add that these programs, the tax education programs, can only be effective if they speak to the different contexts and characteristics of the taxpayers. There will be different types of taxpayers, different characteristics, different contexts, and it might be helpful if these messages are tailored. And in our case, we explore one of these segments of taxpayers or potential taxpayers called the informal sector, and we seek to know whether they have adequate information about their obligations, about the tax system, and so on. And so basically, that is how we contextualize our study. To what extent is the tax education program, the taxpayer education program, aligned to the unique characteristics and the needs of the informal sector taxpayers, or at least the potential taxpayers. And it is important to focus on this particular segment of the taxpayers. In the opening remarks, it was clearly pointed out that the tax GDP ratio has stagnated. There are limited increases, and clearly one of the reasons that has been pointed out from various studies is the size of the informal sector. which is usually difficult to tax. Currently, the informal sector accounts for close to 55% of Uganda's GDP. Now, if you don't tax that and you focus only on the formal sector, then you will begin seeing answers as to why the tax revenue, the tax GDP ratio is stagnating. The informal sector is expanding, and therefore efforts must be made deliberately to make inroads into that sector. But it's also one of the biggest employers. Actually, it's the single biggest employer. And currently, about 9 million people. The statistics we have for the year 1920, and the number of people employed in the sector was slightly over 8.6 million people. Now, of course, with COVID and these shocks we've seen over the last year, clearly we should have hit the 9 million mark as people employed in the informal sector. But, so you can now clearly see, based on those parameters, that there is a clear disconnect between the size of the informal sector and its contribution to GDP. I think the tax register, the colleagues from URA will tell you the numbers, but clearly you will have less than 2 million taxpayers on that register. So you can begin seeing the disconnect. So the efforts in place so far are largely around the presumptive tax system, but this in itself has not given the results possibly that were anticipated, and one can clearly see that in the tax revenue GDP ratio. So there is still some room for engagement with the informal sector. Now, so that is what I was trying to summarize, that there is quite still some huge potential. And experience really from elsewhere gives comfort that continuous engagement, education, and information sharing can enhance voluntary compliance. So what are these gaps and what can be done about them so that the country can possibly increase some revenue to support service delivery? So in these few slides, we just try to provide some more details on the informal sector. We try to characterize it. Let's see how big it is so that we all convinced that this is a place that we need to focus on. And by the way, when we talk of the informal sector, it is also in itself quite diverse. We should not only look at people selling maize on the roadside or bananas or sweets. Those are just a segment of the informal sector. There are many, many, many others in the upper tiers of the informal sector who are making a lot more money, and it would be important to make inroads into these particular segments. And so, but generally, that is the picture. We provide the statistics between 2015-16 and 2019-20. These are generated from the Uganda National Household Survey, which is undertaken by the Uganda Bureau of Statistics. So these are really official statistics in a sense. And what we wanted to show here is one basic thing: the informal sector is expanding. You can see the total number of enterprises between 2015, 16, and 2019 and 2020. And it is dominated by very, very basic activities in a number of cases, retail trade and food and beverages. Those are the key. But if you want to add, you already have brewing of these Malwa and Waraja and so on. So, but you can also see that there are increases. You can see the many borders on the road. I think you can identify them from these numbers. So the sector is actually, it keeps on expanding. Okay, thank you. So this is just a summary of those dominant sectors, subsectors within the informal sector, largely derived from the 2019-2020 Uganda National Household Survey. So it is just telling you which activities dominating the informal. No, actually, this is from the 1920 survey, and it is largely where the women actually. I think this one was by characterization by gender, which activities in the informal sector employing more women than men. Maybe just to point out that in terms of gender characterization, the activities dominated by women are the ones with the least earnings. But this is something we just wanted to mention for information. And I alluded to this a little earlier in terms of employment. By 2019-20, the sector was employing close to 8.6 million people. So we can begin again seeing how big this sector is, and therefore why it would be unwise not to focus on it as a potential source of tax revenue for government. Now, we want to look at we are looking basically at tax education, and clearly there are already some ongoing efforts. The URA and the other partners are doing work and some work actually in this area. And currently, I think following the restructuring, is it in 2005 or thereabout, the tax education is coordinated by the tax education unit under the corporate affairs division. But the new thing with the current approach is that all staff of the authority are required to pass on tax education information to the public and to the potential taxpayers. We have quite a number of them, and hopefully they will educate us actually on a few of these things before they leave. It's their mandate. They are supposed to do this. Of course, the approach being used clearly, if you, instead of focusing it only in one unit, allowing all staff to participate, augurs well for a situation where resources are constrained and where you will have a limit on the number of people you can employ and dedicate them specifically to do tax education work. So to that extent, it is a very good approach. And the focus really, just like it is expected, is to increase tax literacy, which in turn enhances voluntary compliance, and it increases then the tax revenue. So that's the basic focus of the tax education program at the URA. So what are its main components? One is production and provision of simplified tax information to the public. And this is really done through a number of different avenues. I want to believe that many of us will have seen a number of these, the tax literature, the translation. I think up to this point, some of the literature has been translated into about 9 local languages, including Swahili. I hope that is still the status, so that is being done. There is also information on the frequently asked questions. So if there are a few things you want to know, you can make reference to that. The other one is the web portal. You can log into the URA web portal, the website, and get some information, but they also share information to some of the corporate entities. Then these are the other elements of the tax education program, the stakeholder interaction, the taxpayer day. I think before COVID, I think this used to be at Kololo for a number of years at the Independence Grounds. The tax clinics is another recent development. Those of us who listen to radio stations regularly, you will once in a while come across officials from URA talking about different aspects of the tax system. And there has been very good effort to introduce the tax education curriculum, which is supposed to be taken up in secondary school. Of course, introducing it, mainstreaming it into the education system is usually problematic because the students, the pupils already have enough workload, so you have to drop one and introduce this, but hopefully this is something that will come to bear fruit. So we have looked at what URA is doing, and we make some observations, at least up to that point, because we are seeking to identify the tax education gaps, the knowledge gaps that we think there are. So we make some observations. One is, given what we've seen and what we've gone through, one almost concludes that there is limited personal touch, especially with regard to certain types, certain segments of the potential taxpayers. So we saw the web portal, we saw the corporate emails, we've seen the curriculum into secondary school, but all these, if quite a number of these, will hardly speak to the unique characteristics of the informal sector participants. They are not into emails, and these require clearly a different approach. So one begins identifying some gaps between what is being offered currently and what might actually work for this particular segment of taxpayers. So there is some bit of disconnect between the modalities we have today and the unique characteristics of the informal sector participants who may not have emails, who work almost 12 or 13 hours a day, and so on and so on. So who may not have time for this kind of engagements. And by and large, then they are more suitable to the formal sector taxpayers. Of course, we pose a question and ask whether this is because of the need to manage the costs of administration, and therefore if there is a cost implication, we don't know fully, but at least there have been concerns about the cost of tax administration. And in as much as the language, in as much as translation is done, there have also been concerns that the language remains fairly technical to an average person in the informal sector. Those are some of the observations we make. But also, it is not clear at all what underpins the tax education message that the URA currently provides. So ideally, these messages should be underpinned by research and surveys, identify the gaps, identify the challenges, and then draft the message around those areas that can help address those gaps. That one is one other observation that is coming out from our field interactions. Of course, there will be some standard messages that are supposed to be given, but the context-specific issues have to be taken into consideration. So in this case, the message should be able to address issues about perceptions of the tax system, what's the status quo, and how can you address that? So the message should really address such issues. How about the capacity of the potential taxpayers to comply with the tax obligations? To what extent are they equipped, and how do you resolve that? How about perception is about service delivery? To what extent is that mainstreamed into the tax education programs? How about perception is about the risk associated with non-compliance? Because if the risk is perceived to be very low, then nobody, or at least very few people, will go out to voluntarily pay if the risk is quite low. So these are issues that should be underpinning the messages that the tax education programs take out to the public. But there is also limited political engagement and leadership in the tax education campaigns. It has, by and large, remained to be a technical activity, largely by the URA and a few civil society organizations. But the responsibility to enhance voluntary compliance and pay taxes should be taken up by a broader part of the society. And the impact of the tax education programs that have been implemented thus far not, I think that's the correct way to put it, are not regularly evaluated. So one would not easily see the link between what has come out of the previously undertaken exercises. That is another issue that we observe as a limitation to the current arrangement. So very briefly, we will not spend the time on the literature, but just to say 2 or 3 things. One is that in the literature, we see how tax education and information reduce non-compliance. There is a mistake in our slide. The examples, we will add non-compliance to that. And we see some examples from Nigeria, and this is very recent literature, and from Zimbabwe. So again, it goes back to what we said in the introduction, that tax education clearly has quite some bit of value. And in the literature, one So we move then quickly to the methodology. This was largely qualitative by and large, and we did a review of the existing information and literature. We've just shared that both in the practice at URA and in the literature, and we identify some gaps even at that point. But also, we went ahead to do some field interviews and focus group discussions. And we also had, as the team was introduced, a number of colleagues from institutions that are directly handling this type of work. So we benefited greatly from their expertise. So it was really, by and large, a qualitative study. So for the other component where we did the field work, it's largely the informal sector. Actually, it was basically the informal sector. And we pick out these particular segments of the informal sector. And as we had seen earlier on, these are by and large those that dominate the informal sector from the statistics that we saw much earlier. And we try to summarize the characteristics of the respondents in terms of their demographics. The sector is dominated by men, but there is also a good representation of women. 43% are women. So this is not possibly very bad. In the other national statistics, the picture is not very different. It is about 46 to 54. So this is not very far from what the national picture would give. And the informal sector operators are generally young, over 70%, below the age of 40. Of course, this is also in line with the demographics that we have today in the country. But there is just one point we make here, that this demographic might mean that these are more likely to be receptive to information, tax education, information and messages if one went out with an aggressive campaign to do exactly that. Fortunately, they have had some schooling. Only 17% have primary education and below. All the others have secondary and above. So again, these are people whom you can engage. These are people who can receive tax messages and who can understand the issues that you want to communicate if you really went out to communicate. And just the way we saw from the other national statistics, the informal sector respondents that we dealt with, again, we find that the dominant activity is the retail trade subsector. Now, this one also, again, has some advantages with regard to the tax education programs, because for the retail trade, these are people who have a location. You can find them. They are not traders on the street who will be changing location every other day. These are people whom you can find in a certain location, and these are people then you can give a message and go back and follow up. So that is also something encouraging. And one other thing then, which is very interesting, is that most of the enterprises have been in existence for more than a year. I'm sure many of us have heard about, which we can call misleading information, that more than half of the enterprises and businesses collapse within 1 year of their establishment. Definitely, that can never be correct. And even from here, that information is quite clear. So what's the advantage of that? One, so they have been in operation for more than a year, and they can be traced. How can they be traced? Quite a number of them are registered already with the local authorities. They have a license, they have something, and the local authorities already know them, which is already a very good thing. These are people you can trace and follow up on. But if you have been around for 2 years, for 3 years, then you should be able to begin learning a few things about record keeping, about tax obligations, about tax laws, about the applicable taxes to your business, and so on and so forth. So again, these give fairly good ground for engagement by the tax education and administration authorities. So this just summarizes the years of operation of these enterprises in percentage form. So we see even quite a number that are 6 years and beyond. So again, just to underscore the fact that these enterprises are there, they can be traced, and they can be engaged on a number of issues, including their tax obligations. And this is the point we made earlier, that they are known, quite a number already known by the local authorities. They are already, they already have licenses, and therefore there can be a good starting point. Now, are they then registered? Are they registered with the URA? Now that's where the challenge now starts coming in. Only it's a fairly small number that has gone on to register with the URA. And what makes it worse is that even those that have registered with URA, only a smaller percentage again pays any form of taxes. So the register itself would be, in a sense, inflated with the enterprises, with the people who don't actually make any contribution to taxes. And they give a number of reasons as to why they are not registered with the URA. Now, these percentages, obviously, there are those respondents that give more than one answer, so it won't exactly add to 100, but there are those who say they don't know where to register, others don't know how to register, and others don't know the rationale for registering. So again, one can begin seeing the gaps that need to be covered by these tax education programs. These are very, very basic things that every potential taxpayer should actually know. And we also mentioned that some of them, even if they are registered with URA, they again don't pay taxes, and the perception is about service delivery, and therefore unfairness of the tax system featured quite prominently, and issues around the low tax morale, which directly again emanates from these perceptions. So again, how does the tax education system, the tax education initiative, cover these perceptions? How much of these do we know, and how much of these do we incorporate in the tax education programs, and how do we evaluate the progress that we make with regard to handling these? Those are issues. So do these respondents receive some tax education information? Yes, the majority do receive tax education information. But as we are going to see shortly, no, actually not the majority, only a smaller number, sorry, a smaller number actually report that they have received the tax education information. I think that is just below 50, that's about 45%. And In terms of coverage, there is still limited coverage of tax education. This is so far, these are the main elements that have been covered, at least that people have heard about, not necessarily covered in detail. We need just to be clear about that. Some had heard about the importance of paying taxes. About 53 of those who had participated in those programs. Some were told about how to register, how to file returns. So you see, these are fairly small numbers. One would want a situation where the coverage of tax education is more comprehensive and broader than what we see from the numbers from the field. Now, where do they get information from? A number of sources. Of course, yes, URA staff, but a few others, and there are quite a number who don't receive information at all. Now, what gaps, what are these main gaps that were explicitly identified? Of course, along the way, we've pointed to a number of gaps, but we will summarize those again that came out explicitly from the field engagement. And there are knowledge gaps on things as basic as what a tax identification number is, how it can be acquired, how one can file tax returns, the applicable taxes, depending on the enterprise you are handling, tax refunds. Of course, that is even overstretching it, but even there isn't a lot of information, or even any objection is, if any, to an assessment that would be deemed to be unfair. These are really basic things, but we see quite a number of gaps with regard to things as basic as this. And this summarizes the respondents who responded. It gives us a summary of those gaps. So it is very basic things, but many of the taxpayers hardly know, or not taxpayers, potential taxpayers hardly know about this, and clearly one sees that it would be helpful if these were addressed deliberately. So I think the main point is that there is a gap in terms of tax education coverage, and of course also the way it is contextualized to address the specific issues. We've seen that clearly right from the URA program itself through to the feedback that we get from the field. So there is a gap. Coverage is a gap. But also the underpinnings of the tax education programs, and that possibly explains why those gaps have persisted. And one of the things then to do as a recommendation is to continue improving the tax education and information system in such a way that feedback from research and surveys is at the center of the message that is going out to the public. Understanding the issues and structure the message to respond to those issues. I think that would be one way in which we can elicit a response from this otherwise difficult to tax sector. Of course, as we do that, a number of things will have to be taken into consideration. Their perception is about service delivery that we earlier on mentioned. All these are things that need to be taken into consideration in coming up with, or at least continuing to improve the tax education message. But in the meantime, there can be some quick wins. Government is implementing a number of livelihood programs. In fact, I think between 2018 to this financial year, there is over 6 trillion shillings for livelihood interventions. And this money goes to the public out there. So how can this intervention is, how can tax education in the meantime, as the other improvements are being done, how can tax education be included as part of the package that these government livelihood interventions actually contain? I think it would give some room. One would see some quick wins, because as you benefit from OWC, from youth livelihood, from the Women Fund, and many others, tax education should be part and parcel of that. You should register, and since you are not going to pay back that money anyway, at least pay back in form of taxes. So I think, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I think I'll leave the presentation at that for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Hisali. Thank you, Professor. Can we have a louder round of applause for the PI? Amidst us, is my microphone working? Okay. Amidst us, we have the Supervisor Tax Education URA, Mr. Wamala Robert. You're most welcome. We have, yes. Okay. We also have the presence of Dr. Matovu Fred. Okay. Thought so too. We have Dr. Matovu, the presence of Dr. Matovu Fred. You're welcome, sir. We have Dr. Mutenyu. You're most welcome. And we also have Madame Rita Namisango, PR Makere. You're most welcome. We would like to thank Professor for the very educative presentation. And at this juncture, we would invite comments. But before the comments, the team members for this research. For those who are not aware, this REEF grant, you'd always have to work in teams, and you'd have to have juniors as well as seniors. So the team for this project, please stand up for recognition. The team. Okay, those are the brains. Can we clap for them, please? Thank you. So at this juncture, we are inviting comments, recommendations, additions, subtractions to the presentation. So everyone is invited to comment. Breakfast is also ready. We can have the comments as well as the tea. You can get out just right outside the door is where you will find the breakfast. Yes, Dr. Taylor. So can we have
Thank you very much for the insightful presentation. Yeah, now my question, or maybe a question or whatever. Of course, you mentioned that we have a growing informal sector. I'm wondering, because I think I don't remember seeing that. Is there anything collected from there? Because you haven't shown that. And if it is as if nothing has been collected, and maybe you are but since of course some are registered and whatever, so I'm just interested to know, is something being collected or nothing at all? So basically that's why. So basically when you say that some are registered even by URA and nothing is collected, so maybe now we turn to URA because if they are registered actually, and they collecting something.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor and the team for the research. I think we all agree tax education is an important component. We want to collect more taxes and have more domestic resource mobilization. I looked at two comments. I looked at your respondents. They are mostly coming from what my sister called the informal sector. And you correctly call them potential taxpayers. I get the sense that you are talking about the direct taxes. About this potential taxpayers is informality. I was thinking in one of the gaps, maybe another research, why has the informality persisted so long? All these years, the economy is growing and the informal sector is also growing. Why do we have so much informality going on? So is there a motivation for people to become formal anyway? When I start my business, is there any attraction for me to formalize? Those are the issues before you can think about these potential taxpayers actually being educated to pay taxes, the direct taxes when they become formal. So these are some of the issues we want to say. But I think it's a good starting point to ask ourselves, how do we expand the tax base by reducing the informality? The economy is growing and the informality is also growing. Why? That is a key question somebody should be explaining. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Once again, I'm Kayonde Vares, Chairman of Asita. And we thank you, Professor, for the presentation. Just a few comments. One, my predecessor in the presentation, in the reaction, was talking about informal sector growth. I think we need to relate politics with the informal sector because the politicians are very much interested in the informal sector and encouraging them and being looked at as their voters. And they encourage them not to go ahead and register. And this is for both those who are in government and those who are not in government. Number two, we already have an association for the informal sector. And I was sharing with them and I was asking them, why should you form an association of the informal sector? You should form maybe a transition association from informal to formal. But if you call yourself the association of the informal sector, then it becomes even more dangerous, encouraging them to continue being informal. There is also a comment which Professor should tell us about two things. One, the presumptive tax. My association was very instrumental in getting the presumptive tax. This was because with the small timers, for them making a return and you have to employ the service of a doctor or an auditor, it will be even more expensive than the tax obligation you are supposed to pay. So we thought the small timers should go through that window. They also contribute to the national coffers. At the same time, you don't subject them to audits, which the professional auditors will ask much more than their tax obligation. Then the other thing which Professor would also tell us about the effect of the tripartite relationship which was created between URA, Uganda Education Service Bureau, and the local authority, because they had agreed that in order to be issued with a license by the local authority, you must have registered with URA. And in order to get a license with URA, sorry, registration, to get a team, then URSP is also at the close by so that you register your business. So what did this effort come to? Did it stop at the center in Kampala, or it was even done outside the city, and it is done even in other cities or in other towns of Uganda? Then I think we also need to be very serious on the benefits of those who are registered, those who have formalized. If it takes me ages, and if I want an income tax clearance and I am going for a bid, and once I've been complying, I've been paying, but when it comes to income tax clearance, I don't get it. Then when I come and they say it's objected, when I come over, you are telling me each time you are raising a new tax obligations, and you are telling me no. Now if you pay this is when you will get the tax clearance. I was already surprised recently when I applied for one and I got one. It was a miracle to me, because usually I've been going through hurdles and I've missed a number of bids just because of the tax clearance. So we need to help those who are compliant so that at least it's appetizing to register rather than making it. Then they practice. Professor, look at this one, and very seriously. There has been a practice, at least before COVID, where accounts of taxpayers were put on the machine. And you could find that URA is telling you when to withdraw your money, and then they talk about your tax obligations, and it talks of millions, which you don't even have in capital. So this one was also a deterrent to those who were interested in registering. And it becomes a real problem if you feel like, why did I register? And even the messages which we are getting during COVID, they continue telling you, please file the work, and you know you are not working, you are under key and the law, and they tell you, please, you are delaying in the payment of your tax obligations. These are some of the issues which we need to address so that at least to make it appetizing and those who are compliant. I remember finally, because I'm not one of the presenters, but I remember it was like exactly this is what we had when we were just starting Casita. That it was like people who were paying taxes. Now I'm talking about customers. And when you pay, you would be intercepted as if you have not paid. And it would be profitable for you not to pay. And you wait until you are intercepted and you grease or you oil your way so that you offload when you are more comfortable. So if you have paid, let me enjoy. If I am formal, lets me enjoy some rights, which, and then the obligations, if I've met my obligation. And for those who have not paid, let them also have tougher obligations so that at least they are made to pay and they will formalize. I submit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I guess we've heard from the private sector. We have Madam Phoebe Lutaya on Zoom. Remember, we have people on Zoom. I would like to hear her comment first, then we'll move like this.
Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, all protocol observed. I'm Phoebe Lutaya Kamia from the Reef Secretariat. I just wanted to contribute a few ideas or share some comments with that team. This is a research that seems to be very well done, and it quite extensively addresses some of the issues that have been raised by Prof. However, I was wondering whether the team looked at the customs area of doing business when they were conducting their research, because what I see coming through is a focus of more of what we call the domestic tax end of taxation. There is also some tax in the customs business. So the team may want to look at some of what happens. It has been hinted on by the former presenter that there are issues on that side of taxation too, and they're quite interesting to read and understand. The other area I would want to make a small comment on is on the disconnect that Prof alluded to in his presentation, the disconnect of the taxman, between the taxman and the informal sector. I was asking myself whether the team went ahead to look at efforts that have previously been put in place by the URA, like tax catalysts, where staff camp in areas for a week or two, and they move door to door, teaching people, teaching clients about taxation, tax barazas, where different people come together and discuss, among others, rights and obligations of taxpayers, tax issues like perceptions, risks to non-compliance, and challenges in doing business with the tax regimes in Uganda today. There are also serialized dramas, which the team may want to look at, which are meant to reach out to this informal sector and educate about taxation, like Kamu Kamu, which teaches people about the value of tax, Sebano, Kakasa, which is a taxpayer compliance campaign that was undertaken by the URA, where they encouraged people to volunteer information. And this voluntary compliance would attract waiver of penalties and interest on tax. If you haven't been paying and you voluntarily give information, then they would forgive the interest and tax and penalties that would be accruing as a result of your having not paid for a while. The team may want to look at some of these efforts to make the research that is coming through better than it even is now, good as it is. And lastly, I would also want some guidance on whether the team looked at what is called as the TREP, the Tax Registration Expansion Program that was started as an initiative between the URA, the local governments, and the Registration Bureau. That effort has yielded a lot of success in expansion of the tax base, and it has addressed some of the challenges that were being experienced by the informal sector. I submit and thank you.
Thank you, Madam Lutaya.
Thank you, Dr. Patrick, for the West Revenue Organization for Development. I have a few issues I want to make on your presentation on tax education. First of all, I was looking at education. What are we actually looking for? And I'm seeing that one of the things which are critical is changing taxpayer culture, our attitudes towards tax paying. Why are we not paying on time? When we look at some countries, the compliance is 99.9%. And when we ask them, why do you rush to pay? Or why do people rush to make a contribution in building a church? But they will not make that rush a contribution to URA. What is the problem? And I like the idea of a survey being made so that they can tailor-make some of the suggestions they make. I think the problem has been, we already know what the problem is. We know what we want to give them. We give them what we think they should hear, but we rarely tell them what they want to hear. I think the design of the education program should change and actually focus on what are the problems. We need to do much more engaging with the taxpayers. When there is a default, it's either your life or your money. That attitude is extremely dangerous. It alienates the taxpayer. So I think in tax education, why do people attend tax education? Is it because they want to learn more about the tax, or they want to save themselves from being harassed? So we need to make that synergy where there is a kind of a partnership. Is URA working for the people, or is it working for something else? So we need to make the URA a people organization, so that you don't see a URA vehicle and run. You should see a URA vehicle and feel comfort. These are my people, they are coming to help us. How much do we talk about the values of the staff of the URA? So that's a perception of who. Are we collecting taxes for whom? What are the values, both with the taxpayers and the value with the tax collectors? I think that's a fundamental issue that should be looked at, the value system. How much are we paying attention to the future taxpayers? We have talked about tax education, of course, put in a curriculum. What are we going to tell them? That paying tax is good, or paying tax is your constitutional duty to pay, or pay taxes so that you can receive services, when they know that maybe the school they're attending is being paid for from somebody's salary who has already paid tax. So how are we going to convince the children that this actually the father is paying taxes in order to meet service in education, when it is fully paid by the father, that is going to take you to hospital, when it is fully paid, each time the child is sick, you take to hospital and you pay a lot of money? How are we going to teach these children? Are we going to tell them lies, or are we going to tell them the truth? How are we going to make them believe that truly these taxes we are paying are for delivering services? This is something that must be connected up. And I think the URA should link up with the local governments in talking about tax education, because we, the taxpayers, don't differentiate between URA and the local government. We need to look at the tax load on each of these taxpayers. Look at the business person. What taxes am I paying? You're paying VAT, you're going to pay income tax, you're going to pay the local service tax, the local government, property tax, trading license, garbage collection fee, street parking, security fee for the LOC1, a contribution to your trade association. Now, what am I left with? I think this tax education should address all these issues. Let us look at the tax load of the taxpayer. Why are we frustrated? Are we addressing the injustices in the tax system? Somebody is earning a few less than $2,000, and URA takes 40% of that. Then 18% goes for VAT out of the balance. Then the rest goes for paying a child's education. So what is left is, are we going to be interested in business growth? If people don't have disposable income, how are we going to support business growth? We have nothing to spend. So I think in tax education, we should not only be looking at one side. We want the money, but what is in it for the taxpayer? I think that's the area that we need. We have shown that you have these tax-paying exhibitions at Kororo Airstrip. And if I'm living in Nepal, I should come to Kororo to get tax education and see where the money goes. And when you're showing me the video where the money goes, you're showing me a flyover. You're showing me a women's hospital in Mulago, which is expensive. I can't reach it. So I think also tax education, our URA colleagues, and we'll talk this in other forums, let's bring this down to the people. This flyover, they think maybe you're showing in New York, going to see it in Japan. The women's hospital, they think you have picked it from a film. Some of them think it's not here. So what is it there? Where is our service? Because we've had these issues. We don't have aspirin. So I would like to see a picture of a health center in Wundubujo and tell us this is where your tax money is going. Let us look at that health center and relate it to the tax payment. And that will make us excited and we shall be paying. So let's bring it to what really matters and not showing only rosy service delivery pictures, which are out of reach. And I think we think it's just a film show rather than telling us something real. Lastly, I want to say that in this tax, we need to look at one of the issues is the enforcement, making it difficult for people to evade. That's good. And I think the URA has focused on that much more than on the facilitation, facilitating us to pay easily without bloodshed. But most importantly, and I think lastly, we must build trust. We must build trust. The taxpayer should have trust that where I am putting my money, it's going to be put in good use. Obviously, that part is not for URA, and we don't like to blame them on the other side of the trust where the money actually goes. But it means that we must collaborate and partner in delivering these messages so that we deliver the message that is going to be believable. And it's not just ticking a box. Did you do tax education? Yes. Did you do tax education? Was it effective? Did it make sense? Was it relevant to us? But I thank you very much for the study, and you made some good revelations, which I be sure they will help us to improve our revenue mobilization.
Thank you very much. I'd like to congratulate Hisali and the team. This research well done. But I also want to add on Mr. Patrick Kawale's contribution. Patrick, I must say personally, I'm really excited vision. And the summary, Professor Eria mentioned something about it, but is again shy to elaborate on it. He's talking about
because of time. because of time, sir.
Low tax morale. I think what you're talking about is issue concerning the tax morale. Mentioned in the report, but I wanted to look at, I was very anxious, wanted to see the presentation. What do we mean by a low tax morale? I did not see anything like that. So I don't know if this would be another proposal next time, because we really need to know something about this. You have already here, the tax GDP ratio in Uganda has stagnated around 13% for quite a number of years. Now, referring to this issue of low tax morale, What is this you're talking about? Tax moral. Just like Patrick has just mentioned, these are issues concerning with service delivery. If I pay my tax, I need to see the returns from my tax. Are my children going to good schools, public schools? Do I have good roads driving from where I'm working, where I'm staying, or to my village? Okay. When I go to hospital, am I getting the right services? Am I getting the treatment? Am I getting security? In other words, are we getting security for all? These are issues that you must address. Because if somebody pays the tax, he wants to go to the hospital and get the treatment and works out. If somebody wants to drive his car without protocol so that he can, he keeps avoiding going to the garage for some time. But if I'm buying and I'm always in the garage, I'm always in the garage, it's simply because of the bad roads. It's the problem. In Imbale, where I come from, we received the first Tamaka road for over 60 years, just last year. Don't talk about the Tororo Mbale, so that's the highway. I'm talking about a road which goes with where coffee is coming from. Because Mbale is the biggest road in the largest road. But the first Tamaka road, that road, about 43 kilometers straight, it just came last year. Now, I'm paying my tax, but there are no services. There is no road at all. And this is common in many places, I'm sure. Many of us who come from different places. When I talk about security for all, in the year 2002, the thugs broke into my home. I rang the police. The police asked me, do they have a gun? I said, I don't know, because they are breaking. I can hear I can see them, I can hear them want to break it, but I don't know. They have a gun. I don't know. Then after some time, when the thugs had become I disappeared. The police calls me again. Where are you? I told them. So can you please walk and come here? Imagine it was late in the night and the police are telling me to walk to risk my life, leave the home again and go to where I am. So are we getting security for all? These are issues that we need to be addressed in issues to boost people's morale to pay tax. Because now, why should I pay tax when I have to look for money and hire a private security? I pay tax when I have to go to private health care. Pay tax when after I'm always in the garage preparing because of what bad road. And pay tax because I have to take my children to private schools. So if you can elaborate more, maybe in your next paper, it will not be now because this is dissemination. Law, tax morale, and probably advice. So this is basically political economy. It's no longer an issue, but this is political economy. So if you can give us explanation, it would be very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. That was a very great presentation. It was a wonderful study. These gaps are indeed affecting us in how we pay taxes. We even appreciate why the taxes should be paid. You mentioned it came up in your gaps, and I can see somehow you're bringing them all in your recommendations. But I wanted to know, especially why I say that there's a disconnect between services and the taxman, and the lack of political engagement with this tax education. I want to know, Prof, if you found out what if there is any effort by URA or any programs in place where URA is engaging with government, especially the legislative arm, because what we see and what we are used to is that the hunted and the haunted when it comes to the legislative arms and URA, how they relate. But I want to know if there are any programs in place, how URA is trying or endeavoring to reach out to this legislative arm who are so much in touch with the populace or the grassroots or the communities, who are so much into informal sector. Is there any efforts URA is doing to really get to, so that we stop this paradigm, this haunted, this hunter, this URA, this PMPs, so that we have a better story from them by URA making an effort actually to reach out to the MPs and making the story. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Prof, and the entire team. I just want to add my voice to the previous person that talked about the tax load. With URA, and I will stand in the shoes of a taxpayer. I'm twice a Betty from Eria University. But as a taxpayer, I'm considering a few tax heads, the ones I know of here that probably have had to participate in one. We pay customs, which includes the surcharge, import duties, domestic VAT, not registered. Then we have damage for any day that whatever you have carried in comes in a country, excise duty, VAT, signage, local service tax, traders license, payers you earn, corporation, presumptive, rental, and the rest. So what does this mean? What I would be really interested in is assuming I'm earning my 2M, and I have said to pay most of these tax types. How is my tax burden? How much is taken back to the government? And what do I retain as an individual? Could this tax burden shy us away from paying tax? That is what I would submit.
Thank you, Madam Maise.
There is someone there.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Professor, for that wonderful presentation. What I cannot tell you that you have opened a can of worms, because this is an area where research is very minimal and very important. It has so many dimensions. So many issues. People are concerned about so many issues. Unfortunately, they have not been handled for quite a long time. That's why I actually see we don't have a lot of engagement when it comes to taxes. We have the traditional approach. Tax is a non-quid pro quo, and tax is by law. You have to pay or we punish you. That's the approach that has been in this country for quite some time. But I also want to add some things. First of all, tax education. We all important, like any other education. But I think the other part of the question is, do people need it? I don't know whether you need to interrogate that, because I have seen or I've heard where revenue authority guys are on the radio and immediately people switch off to something else. And when you ask them, we say, what are they telling us? Those are agents of they're just making money for some people to enjoy, who don't benefit from them. So you have to ask that question: do people need tax education before even designing it? Then if you need it, is there a relationship? You have actually indicated there is a relationship between tax education and voluntary tax compliance, which is a positive, according to you. But I think we need to interrogate that. I know that you have quoted someone from Zimbabwe, and we need to come back to Uganda. Whether those who are not paying taxes actually don't know. Let me give you an example. If any of us here get appointed in working to World Bank, UN, all those tax exemption, how many of us will file voluntarily with Uganda Revenue Authority? Because remember, they don't deduct pay as you earn. And I want to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that a number of Ugandans working in those organizations, because the Revenue Authority has failed to track them, they don't file. Don't they file because they don't know the law, or they have gotten an opportunity not to be hunted down? So, is it about knowledge? Is it about perception?
what is it? Because the long time I've spent, especially with governance issues, the easiest description of a problem is lack of knowledge and awareness and the capacity. So we always come to give capacity without going to the underlying factors. If I have an opportunity to dodge a tax, will I not dodge because I love Uganda, or I only pay where? And then brings us also another issue, Professor, the dualism. In your description of informal, you actually draw a line, but I want to inform you that there's a dualism. There is informal in informal, there is informality in informal. Too much of it. So how do you handle it? There is informality, there is also formal in informality. They cut across. So there is no distinction at the moment that when you say we are talking about formal, they're on the right side, and we are talking about informal. I have a business, whatever, but when I do informal business and I earn informal and I don't pay on my informal income. Recently, we had a discussion with our forum, and the guys who are there after informal, and they were telling us if you want to make money, go informal. Just don't go into this formal thing because we have an authority. Then there's also another concept which I also want you to consider, the concept of informal taxation. Dr. Mtenyo talked about it. The informal taxation is where we are paying for things we are supposed to get from government. You know that we make roads now as private contribution in our communities. We contribute to almost everything, security and whatever. When we do that, even if we have not given government, we have paid the tax. So how do you differentiate them in your analysis? Because at the end of the day, when government has failed to deliver on services, which we think should, then we have to improvise. And when we have improvised, where is the appetite for us to give you more money? That is another whatever. So I think those are the issues of which we need to get deeper. I know that this is just the beginning, and how I wish that we get quite funding to do research in this area. And then I think we will unpack. But I think the best thing is that, like Patrick said, my colleague, that we need to engage. We need to abandon forceful ways of collecting taxes, and we engage so that we can try to solve all these problems. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. The real office is online, so we will get more time. Sometimes is also clear.
Thank you very much. Example is my name from the Civil Society Budget and I would like to thank those who put the study together. I think this is really informative. However, speaking from what Dr. Mpenyo said, I think as tax education is important, and there are some people who don't have information on taxes, what to do, how to do the filing, how to file the returns, how to get a TIN number, like you mentioned. However, I found it a bit contradicting when you brought out the information on tax, the need for tax education, but then later on you mentioned the failure to pay is due to the morale and then the perception. So that means there is a group of people who have the information, but have time and time again, maybe out of experience, learned how to stop paying taxes because of different reasons that many have mentioned about. So it goes beyond looking at tax education to looking at why is someone not interested in paying. And that also picks up from what Mr. Kandole said about many countries have people obliging to pay taxes, and they are fine with it. Why is it that in Uganda we still have a problem? Or, okay, not just Uganda, there are other African countries, but why do we still have a problem? There is fatigue, there is morale, there is unfairness. If you talk to many people doing trade, they'll tell you sometimes a URA person will look at items and say, these are very expensive, I'm going to charge you this much, without actually looking at the receipts to know this is what I paid for them. So someone who goes through such an experience and pays millions this time, the next time we look for ways to bring in the item without having to pay taxes. So this study is good, but it can't work in isolation. We can't look at tax education alone. It has to be combined with why are people fatigued? Why don't people have morale to pay taxes? Why is there? How can we bring a connection between what I pay and the services that are provided to me, so that will keep the morale for people to pay their taxes? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Sophie. Oh, I thought that.
Maybe I should.
I think lastly, Dr. Williams first. No, sorry.
Okay. Thank
to amplify and finalize recommendations. Number two is the link now between the tax collection or revenue with the service delivery. So again, now that, whereas it might be slightly out of the scope, we think it's important because I think the message is that, of course, tax education is just one component of raising voluntary compliance and creating awareness, but these things should come as a package. They are not going to be isolated. So certain reforms at different levels which give a fairly comprehensive package that then raises the tax revenue. The issues are discussions I think that we need to open up to and be alive to. How about if the collections were done in such a way that at least part of them, which would have been collected by URA, are taxes, but collected locally, and then you directly link them to services in the locality. Would that require certain percentages? Would it require certain types of taxes? Just talking, not necessarily the fees. These are things that we need to go into in order to create that link so that people can actually relate what they are paying, what they get in turn. And definitely in many other jurisdictions, this is being done. Then there are also the political economic issues around taxation. So those are the thematic areas, but I will then respond to just a few of the specifics, but we try to categorize them in that, and I have colleagues possibly who will be able to supplement. Yes, Dr. Mato started off with the question that the informal sector is indeed paid. Yes, they pay the indirect taxes, but if you have a huge business, Mr. Kayon talked about this in Chicago, and all you have is the presumptive tax, and even sometimes that you don't pay at all, one wouldn't think that that is the best way of making a contribution. So I think, yes, the indirect taxes inevitably you will have to pay, but direct taxes also do exist and they are obligations. How do we get people into that bracket? Mr. Kayobe again raises very important political economic issues around the growth of the informal sector. Now, yes, there are those associations and there are political economic issues, but at the same time, the political leaders would require this same revenue to run the affairs of the public, of government. So what should be that delicate balance? How do we best handle this? I think one would go for the issue of allowing the contribution in form of taxes and linking it directly to service delivery. That's the point I just made, that is it possible that these taxes, then, or at least part of them, can be collected locally and tied directly, addressing the needs of people within those localities? Maybe that could work, and maybe it would solve some political economic issues so that people, the local communities, own the money, but they also own the services and take responsibility. Now, the issue of presumptive tax, we have colleagues from URA. This is clearly one that hasn't worked very well. because it is more or less this one. There is a that you really relate to someone with the capital base of 10 million, you tell them to do just presumptive tax, and there are very many in Chicago here, even with more money than that. They are all quite a number of them that are presumptive. So that is the tax credit. The process of the word that someone can walk in with a problem, you diagnose the problem, you do the finding, you help them to progress so that you reduce the burden on them taking up these services. That should be the essence of the tax clinic. Now, those abuses in the system which discourage payment, I think our colleagues from Eria will provide some answers in that area. And yes, the tripartite the one can see some results, and that is how we had a number of businesses, enterprises. They are registered, they paid the licenses, but they don't pay URA. So this is again where we need to evaluate the point that Dr. Chiwala raises. How much evaluation of these programs are we doing regularly? Or just try to run them and this retire from again. Yes, we are aware of these interventions, but one of the points that we mentioned again in the course of the presentation is the one that many of these have not been evaluated. So one cannot really point out the effect that they have had. They are not regularly evaluated. Maybe it is something that will be taken up. But at least it's a key point that as the programs, one can see some results, and that is how we had a number of evaluate and see whether there is anything there, and then what else needs to be done. Mr. Kandole, thank you so much. These are definitely very helpful, but they again relate fundamentally issues about the link between service delivery and the payment. I think we can summarize those are the ones, but we also make the point about the need to have certain clear underpinnings of the tax education program, which is definitely a key recommendation that is coming out as part of the study. Yes, but something of the tax morale, you clearly tied to service delivery. I don't think that is something we will dispute, and possibly we can just follow up and see what else can be done. Point out the effect that they have had. They are not regularly evaluated. Maybe it is something that will be taken up. But at least it's a key point that as the debates like this help, because they are going to point out most probably than not the need for a more comprehensive review of the entire system. How do you simplify it? How do you reduce the load? How do you share information? How do you link it to service delivery? I think that is something that we need to urgently be engaging on. Here, there are many weaknesses. And now, my very good friend, Mr. Quite a number of points
maybe the one
the public actually perceives that you are giving them, or you are giving them something that is completely detached from what they know. If you give something completely detached from what they know or what they perceive, they will definitely come and listen to you. And in the evening, when they go back home, they will backbite you. They say, look at this one, they think we don't know what we are doing. So it is still important, but I think just some adjustments to make it work. Now, yes, clearly people need the tax education. People need to know the obligations clearly. And obviously what we need to keep saying again and again is, what do they in return benefit from this? In other jurisdictions, like in the US, even their nationals who work for these institutions file returns, isn't it? They do. So we just need to close those gaps and make sure that gradually, Dr. Chiwara says this is not something you can do in one day, but at least gradually, those are things that we need to be taking up. Issues of duality in the formal and informal, definitely you are right. There are these two different perspectives of the informal sector, the labor market perspective, and then the enterprise perspective. So they clearly capture that duality. So you will be working in a formal organization like this, but without a contract. You are informally employed. So clearly, I think you are right on that. The Madame Sophie from Searsburg, I don't think that we have a contradiction because once issues of morale and perception keep persisting, and yet at the same time you are doing tax education, it can only tell us that you have not adequately captured the message that you should be delivering. So the contradiction won't be from our side, from the finding, but maybe from the implementation, at the implementation level. How come you are running this, but at the same time these problems are persisting? It means there is something that you are not capturing, but it doesn't actually remove the issue of the tax morale. Yes. And the Dr. Biyinza, the NINs and I don't know why the IDs expire, honestly. I'm not very sure. I can also only speculate as to why, and maybe, I don't know whether if a kid of 18 years got a national ID and that peak remains on the ID at 60, and you go to Mulaga and say I'm the one, they might chase you away as an imposter. So maybe there is something. I'm not quite sure. I can only speculate, but clearly the point you make on a very serious note is the need to link the NIN, because the NIN will not change. Whereas you will change the face of the ID, the NIN will remain the same, and that could be really a very big inroad. Now we will go back to the political